afternoon and welcome to Brookline's Martin Luther King Jr. celebration event at the Coolidge Corner Theater. I'm Bernard Green, chair of the Brookline Select Board and also chair of the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee, which was designed to honor the life and times of Martin Luther King and the civil rights struggle for which he was a part. Unfortunately, I must start today's program on a sad note, and that is the passing of Chobe Hoy this weekend. Chobe was very involved in an important part of this annual event and really embodied the values of Martin Luther King Jr. in a way that few people have. Chobe spent her life in service to others here in Brookline and across the Commonwealth. She was a leader in Democratic Party politics and philanthropy. She was also a very successful and admired businesswoman. She was, as King wanted to be remembered himself, a true drum major for peace, drum major for justice, drum major for righteousness, and in all those and other areas, she was a true drum major for service. Chobe Hoy was a great human being and a friend of Brookline, this committee, of myself, and its residents, and the residents of town, especially those residents in need. So I'd like to ask for a moment of silence and that those who knew Chobe reflect on her life and service as a model, possibly model for your own life. And if you did not know Chobe, think about what a life of service like she led would mean for you. Today's program will include Martin Luther King's 1964 address upon receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. Following the King video, Dr. Margarita Guillory will present a talk linking the King address to the current reality that we face, and then Regie Gibson and the Guy Mendilow Ensemble will give what will be a memorable performance related to some of the words of King. During my time as chair of the committee, we have included poetry readings in our programs. King loved and appreciated poetry, and he used poetical techniques throughout his speeches to communicate ideas. So we will start with a reading by Brookline's Poet Laureate, Jennifer Barber. Jennifer will read the occasional poem, Praise Song for the Day, by Elizabeth Alexander. This poem was read by Ms. Alexander at President Barack Obama's first inauguration. I'm not going to try to analyze the poem, that's way over my head. But I did notice a theme in the poem that mirrored a theme in King's address. They both note the ordinary activities of life and the forgotten struggles that brought us to the momentous occasion of the inauguration of the first Black president of the United States, and, with respect to King, the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize. Like Alexander's poem, King's address is steeped in optimism. He accepted the award, quote, with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind, close quote. He concludes his address by acknowledging the ordinary people who made progress possible and surmising that in future generations, quote, men and women will know and children will be taught that we have a finer land, a better people, a more noble civilization, because these humble children of God were willing to suffer for righteousness' sake. Please listen to the program actively and think about its relevance to events in today's world, and ask yourself, where appropriate, what would Martin Luther King do? Now, there's no right answer to that question, but the process of thinking about that question is what is important. King's Nobel Peace Prize address will follow immediately after Jennifer Barber's reading. Jennifer?
Thank you, Bernard. Praise song for the day. Each day, we go about our business, walking past each other, catching each other's eyes or not, about to speak or speaking. All about us is noise. All about us is noise and bramble, thorn and din, each one of our ancestors on our tongues. Someone is stitching up a hem, darning a hole in a uniform, patching a tire, repairing the things in need of repair. Someone is trying to make music somewhere with a pair of wooden spoons on an oil drum, with cello, boombox, harmonica, voice. A woman and her son wait for the bus. A farmer considers the changing sky. A teacher says, "Take out your pencils, begin." We encounter each other in words, words spiny or smooth, whispered or declaimed, words to consider, reconsider. We cross dirt roads and highways that mark the will of someone, and then others who said, "I need to see what's on the other side. I know there's something better down the road." We need to find a place where we are safe. We walk into that which we cannot yet see. Say it plain that many have died for this day. Sing the names of the dead who brought us here, who laid the train tracks, raised the bridges, picked the cotton and the lettuce, built brick by brick the glittering edifices they would then keep clean and work inside of. Praise song for struggle, praise song for the day, praise song for every hand-lettered sign, the figuring it out at kitchen tables. Some live by love thy neighbor as thyself, others by first do no harm, or take no more than you need. What if the mightiest word is love? Love beyond marital, filial, national. Love that casts a widening pool of light. Love with no need to preempt grievance. In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun. On the brink, on the brim, on the cusp, praise song for walking forward in that light. Thank you.
Due to copyright restrictions, MLK Jr.'s acceptance speech cannot be shown here. To view it directly, please pause and click the link in the description below or Google MLK Nobel speech.
Next, Margarita Simon Guillory is Associate Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Boston University. Her forthcoming book, Africana Religion in the Digital Age, explores the diverse ways that African Americans employ the internet, social media, human enhancement technologies, and gaming to construct multidimensional modes of religious identities. Dr. Guillory's talk today is titled, King's Question, Our Response. Reflections on Dr. Martin Luther King's Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. She will bring Dr. King's speech of 60 years ago down to today's reality of continuing social injustices and will challenge us to come up with a response. At least that's what she told me she's going to do. Dr. Guillory's talk will be followed by Regie Gibson and the Guy Mendilow Ensemble performing an original composition, Different Ships, Same Boat, echoing a quote attributed to Martin Luther King. Dr. Guillory?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly an academician, so some things have changed, but I'll try my best to stay true to what I promised. I would like to thank, first of all, the town of Brookline's MLK Celebration Committee for inviting me to share a few words with you this afternoon about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the preacher, the activist, and the scholar. Diverse forms of historical artifacts, like the speech we've just viewed, wonderfully capture Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s multidimensional identity. The first photo here gives us a look at Dr. King as a Nobel Peace Prize recipient. It depicts a moment before he formally addresses an audience at the University of Oslo, and before he even holds the Alfred Nobel Medal in his hands. Instead, it offers a peek into the preparatory process where his wife, Coretta Scott King, is the conductor. In this role, she carefully orchestrates an aesthetic process that is vital because it sets the stage for Dr. King before he even steps onto the stage where he would deliver his acceptance speech. Yes, Dr. King was indeed a Nobel Peace Prize awardee, but as visualized in this image, he was also Coretta Scott King's husband. Dr. King was also a phenomenally powerful preacher, as attested to in this next image, which we will consider momentarily. We'll come back to it. Dr. King's gift of preaching is on full display in his acceptance speech, where he flawlessly integrates a device known as rhythmic repetition. Rhythmic repetition is an element in Black preaching, particularly prevalent among Southern Black preachers. This device not only functions to grab the attention of a listening audience, but to highlight particular portions of the sermon that the preacher wants the audience to remember long after it's over. Dr. King puts this device to use around the halfway mark of his speech, where he shares with the audience what he believes. He starts with, quote, "I believe that the unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality," end quote. Then he immediately offers 4 instances of his beliefs that juxtapositions whining bullets, wounded justice, societal inequalities, and self-centeredness with dignity, hope, other-centeredness, and equality, not just for Black Americans, but for all of those who are experiencing any form of political, economic, and social marginalization. He ends his rhythmic repetition with the following words: I still believe that one day mankind will bow before the altars of God and be crowned triumphant over war and bloodshed, and nonviolent redemptive goodwill proclaim the rule of the land, end quote. This line pulls double duty here. It not only signals or serves as a signal that the flow of rhythmic repetition is near its end point, but more importantly, Dr. King, like Black Southern preachers quite often do, acknowledges God as the supreme authority figure who will exercise his power in the redemptive suffering of those of African descent. This willingness to hold firm to a Christian faith, despite the atrocities of racial terror and injustice, is implicitly displayed in this second image, where Dr. King, the second image, if we can just go back. Yes, thank you. Where Dr. King stands behind a podium. This is not the lectern at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where he served as pastor from 1954 to 1959. Nor is it the podium located at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he served as co-pastor with his father. This picture shows Dr. King standing in the pulpit of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. He is there to deliver the eulogy for 3 of the 4 young Black girls who were killed in the horrific bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church on September the 15th, 1963. In this eulogy, he tells the mourning audience that the young victims of this bombing, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wellesley, Denise McNair, and Carol Robertson, have something to say. He exclaims that, quote, they have something to say to every minister of the gospel who remains silent. They have something to say to every politician who has fed his constituents with spoiled meat of racism. They have something to say to the federal government that has passively accepted the evil system. They have something to say to the federal government that has compromised with the undemocratic practices of Southern Dixiecrats and the blatant hypocrisy of right-wing Northern Republicans. And they have something to say to every Negro who has passively accepted the evil system of segregation and who has stood on the sidelines in the mighty struggle of justice, end quote. Again, Dr. King employs rhythmic repetition to hold in tension the failures of various constituents and a call to action that for him is triggered by the death of these 4 young victims. Dr. King was invited to give this eulogy, not because he was a person sitting on the sidelines, but he was an active participant of the civil rights movement. In 1956, Dr. King's home was bombed. In the same year, he was indicted on boycotting charges by the state of Alabama. And in the next photo, we see a picture of him and his wife walking across the street as the trial is sort of in recess. In 1958, Dr. King is stabbed. In 1963, both Dr. King's hotel room and his brother's home were bombed. Despite these domestic acts of terror, he participated in various protest demonstrations, which led him to being arrested 29 times. One arrest is most memorable because it resulted in the writing of a letter from a Birmingham jail that was later published in the Atlantic Monthly in August 1963. Dr. King was truly an activist. So now I want you to hold on to your seats, because now I'm bringing it to the contemporary moment. Thus far, we've reflected on is that my timer? Thus far, we've reflected on Dr. King as a Nobel Peace Prize recipient, as a phenomenally powerful preacher, and as an activist. But I would be remiss this afternoon if we did not talk about Dr. King, the scholar. In this last photo, we see Dr. King receiving an honorary degree from his alma mater, Boston University, in 1959. 4 years previous to this award, though, he earned a doctorate in systematic theology with a particular focus in philosophy. Dr. King was equally both a theologian and a philosopher. As a philosopher, Dr. King asked profound existential questions that he sought to answer through a theological lens. This formulaic Q&A format is evident in Dr. King's speeches and writings. For instance, the letter from a Birmingham jail is a response to a question. Did you know that? It's a response to a question. It is a direct answer to a select group of Southern white clergy who have questioned the work of his work in the civil rights movement. In a 1968 speech, in which he addresses economic inequalities in relationship to urban rioting, Dr. King asks the following question, quote, "And what has America failed to hear?" End quote. He goes on to answer the question. It has failed to hear the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity, end quote. This Q&A structural format is also present in Dr. King's Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech that we've just heard. He opens with acknowledgments, then without hesitation paints a vivid picture of racial terrors that were happening in the United States. He dovetails this moment of visualization with one simple question: why this prize is awarded to a movement which has not won the very peace and brotherhood which is the essence of the Nobel Prize, end quote. The remainder of his speech acts as a response that attempts to grapple with this very question. While his speech does not offer a comprehensive resolution, what it does provide is a call out of passivity and a call for personal and community action that is premised on other-centeredness, peace, love, and humanity. For Dr. King, other-centeredness involves a temporary suspension, that was a Freudian slip, of one's self-centeredness to give measurable attention to influence the unfolding events of racial inequalities. For Dr. King, peace and love are inextricably linked. For he states that sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace and thereby transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. If this is to be achieved, man must ascertain a human conflict method that rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love, end quote. For Dr. King, other-centeredness, peace, and love not only drives individuals and communities to combat social injustices of all kinds, but these three interrelated orientations are essential in seeing the humanity in those who have historically been dehumanized. Dr. King's acceptance speech is a response. However, Dr. King's speech also prompts questions for us 60 years later. Will we accept despair as the final response to local, national, and global injustices? Or will we actively confront said injustices? Will we reside in a state of selfishness, unable to influence the unfolding events which surrounds us? Or will we act as catalysts that drive impactful change? Will we stand in love, peace, and brotherhood, actively engaging the world as trustees, those who constantly inspire with renewed dedication to humanity? These are difficult existential questions, in the words of my mom, y'all, that Dr. King maintains in his acceptance speech will require us to creatively hold intention, peace, love, and selflessness. But while these questions may seem difficult to engage, Dr. King encourages each of us with the following words. These are his words, not mine. Let us rise up with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days to make America and the world what they ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guillory. Now, everyone get ready. Next is Regie Gibson and the Guy Mendilow Ensemble. Regie has performed before the Martin Luther King celebration event for at least the last 9 years, ever since I've been chairing the committee. And he's always a joy. He's always an exciting performer, and today is going to be no different. He and the Guy Mendilow Ensemble will be performing a skit, would you call it, or whatever you call it, called Different Ships, Same Boat, a play on a quote attributed to Martin Luther King. Regie and Guy, go ahead. Okay. Well, I don't have anything else to say. You want me to dance or something?
Let this be the day freedom rings from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let this be the day that freedom rings from the mighty mountains of New York. Let this be the day freedom rings from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let this be the day that freedom rings from the curvaceous slopes of California. Let this be the day freedom rings from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let this be the day that freedom rings from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let this be the day freedom rings from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. Let this be the day that freedom rings. Let freedom ring. Let this be the day that freedom rings from every village and every hamlet. Let this be the day that freedom rings from every state and every city. Oh, let this be the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, say it with me. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last, free at last, free at last. Oh, thank God Almighty, we are free at last, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Of course, we all know that in spite of the words of that chorus, we are not all free at last. Some of us are more free than others. No, we have a long way to go to make the promises of democracy and those words born of a dream reality. But isn't that why we've come here today? To once again reflect on them and ways to make them not only poetic, but prophetic. And it is my pleasure to introduce someone who will help us reflect. Your host, Guy Mendilow.
It's my pleasure to introduce your host, Regie Gibson. You know, the title of this presentation, Different Ships, Same Boat, is a variation on a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said it with a hope that we would all recognize that no matter where we hail from, we are all here now, journeying together.
This afternoon, Guy and I, from two different communities, African American and Jewish, wish to honor the journey taken by Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. A journey that led them into a deep respect and friendship. And we are a species of journey. Take, for example, our journey from childhood to adulthood.
So often, we grown-ups think we know better than our children. But so often, our children know better than we do. Look at the actions of Greta Thunberg. Look at the actions of the students from Parkland and of those young folks who marched with King. Too often, such children are told they should stop and not engage with this huge and frightening world. Well, this is for the children who did not listen. Chapter 1. Sit down, children.
Sit down, children. I can't sit down. Sit down, children. I can't sit down. Sit down, children. I can't sit down. 'Cause my soul's so happy, I just can't sit down.
And the children said, we want to march in the streets against those who oppress this land. And the grown folk said, children, sit down. And the children said, but we need to march for justice, even if it means we must risk our bodies and our beauties. And the grown folk said, children, sit down. And the children said, but we must stand against water cannons, police dogs, nightsticks, and racist laws. And the grown folks said, children, sit down. The grown folks said, you are too young to do this. We fear that you are not safe in this world, so children, please, please, sit down. And the children said, you are right. We are not safe in this world. Nor will we ever be if we sit down. So no, grown folks, we will not sit down. So children, won't you sit down? Sit down, children. I can't sit down. Sit down, children. I can't sit down. Sit down, children. I can't sit down.
'Cause my soul's so happy, I just can't sit down.
And the children marched, and they marched. They marched so far ahead of the grown folk that the grown folk saw that they went beyond their sight. So they had to listen to the ground for the sound of the children's footsteps. They had to rise up and lift their ears to the air and listen for the voices of the children singing the future. And when they heard the children, the grown folk followed those voices until they found them. And when the grown folk found the children were of so many faces and races, so many places, but they all looked at the grown folk with the same eyes of the one eternal child and said, "Did you not know that we had to be in the house of light? Oh, did you not know that our souls knew where our feet had to go? Did you not know that we are called by the future, telling us to make things right? Oh, did you not know? Oh, grown folks, did you not know? But if you knew the joy in standing for justice, if you knew the joy in speaking for those slain by those sworn to protect, if you knew the joy in locking arms against night-born tiki torches bent on burning church, mosque, and temple, if you knew the simple joy in singing to the anger of your country until you feel it cooling, if you knew the joy in fighting the dark tide that is now threatening to engulf us, you would not say to us, "Children, sit down," for you would know why we cannot sit down, and you would stand with us. You would stand with us. So don't tell us to sit down while our brothers are bulleted out there in the streets. Don't tell us to sit down while our sisters are made into nothing but mounds of meat. Don't tell us to sit down while so many lives are racked with pain. Don't tell us to sit down while our world is engulfed in flames. You can sit down if you want to, but as for us, we are gonna sing up a new sun now. We're gonna sing a new sun up now. We're gonna sing it now, for our souls are so happy that we just can't sit down. So children, won't you sit down? To my fellow human, every dream I have ever had has had the sound of your voice. Every nightmare I've survived has worn your face. The only thing I know about the devil is what I have seen us be to one another. And the only thing I know about God is what I trust we can someday become. Those words were written by poet Stephen Mason, a captain in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. Even after all he experienced, he found a faith that humans could be transcendently humane, even in the face of the worst of humanity. This next story is both true and personal. It is of Guy's grandparents who served in the resistance in Romania and Hungary during the Second World War. Chapter 2, A Rose Among the Ruins.
wonderful. A wedding in the woods. The girl from the town, her lover, captured in the camps. Their best wedding gift, a stolen uniform, so that he can pass as a guard past the guards. Isn't it wonderful? They could dare to love so deeply. They again risk life. He rips through barbed wire. She, defiant, flirts with the soldiers to gain information and then slips away to meet him in the woods. And isn't it wonderful that there, in the midst of the war, there is a forest with trees coupled and old, older than any human animosity. Is it not wonderful that there in this forest they steal a dance? A lean back swerve, just a boy and a girl just for this night. He with dust of ash in his mouth, and she, hunger tight in her belly. Is it not wonderful that just for this night they pillow on a coat, nested on the forest floor, beneath the cold, pure scent of pine, and again, like children, wander in a wild galaxy. The wedding portrait, shot from the waist up to hide the barbed wire tear. In his trousers, exposed more than youth, more than stealth, more than laughter. In black and white, in sap and pine, in star and shine, it shows a question. Is it not wonderful that there can be something else, just as old and just as human as the war?
journey we're taking have a lot of baggage, they somehow think they know all they need to know about each other. We tend to do that. Human curiosity, though, does eventually assert itself, and when someone finds themselves curious about another, they might actually ask a question, and asking questions might have a little habit of leading and becoming a conversation. You never know what's going to happen when folks start conversing. I mean, they might argue, they might fight, but sometimes there's a chance they might actually listen and maybe even learn something. Final chapter. We all may have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. Fancy coffee store behind a woman with looks I'd never seen before, but she seemed to have much charm and style and grace. Well, she stepped to the counter and she ordered a drink. It was an iced cappuccino with soy, I think, but I was preoccupied in trying to surmise her race. It seemed she wasn't quite white, she wasn't quite black, she wasn't quite this, she wasn't quite that. In fact, I guess she wasn't quite anything, I suppose. Now, I didn't want to harass her or come off crass, but the question was burning and I decided to ask, and she said, save your breath, I can guess what you want to know. See, everywhere I go, folks stare at me trying to decode what I'm supposed to be, but you're this, mister, calculating me ain't so easy even for me. So, since she got the interest, I'll take the time and keep that question from smoking your mind. Just buy my coffee and I'll tell you just what I be. So I said, don't sweat, that's a bet. I'm always curious to know what I don't know yet. For me, that's worth a cup of joe or maybe even two. So I reached in my pocket, pulled out the money, paid for the coffee, and said, there you go, honey. Now sit down, girl, tell me, what in the world is you? Well, that's when she took a deep breath. And she went, Jew, Italian, Haitian, American, African, Asian, Mexican, Puerto, Nigerian, Brazilian's what I am. And I'm knit to fit like a patchwork quilt, and from my sweat this country's been built. But keep it simple, stupid, call me American. Now you can just call me American, you can just call me American, though sometimes I ain't quite sure just what that means. But from sea to shining sea, there are 300 million me's, red, white, and blue, and every in between. About democracy and what makes ours different from them ancient Greeks. We broach subjects most folks would tell you is taboo. See, we talked about love, religion, and politics, the Taliban and the Dixie Chicks, Democrats, Republicans, and them green rainbows too. We spoke about when to use the Oxford comma, joked about Congress and all its drama, and wondered, is our economy really still bouncing back? About whose fault it is now that our climate changes of trucks and shumps and good shooting ranges, and why he prefers a PC, she and I like to Mac. Yep, we act so much we lost track of time, and though we differed, we began to find that she and I was quickly becoming friends. Then she looked at her watch and said, gotta run, but thanks for the talk. I've enjoyed it, hon. Who can say maybe one day we'll see each other again? And as we both shook hands and said no more, she grabbed her purse, headed toward the door. That's when some dude looking real confused comes over real slow. He goes, say, buddy, seem like you know that woman. Would you mind very much if I ask you something? I said, save your breath. I can guess what you want to know. Oh, that's when I took a deep breath. And I went, Jew, Italian, Haitian, Dominican, African, Asian, Mexican, Puerto, Nigeria, or Brazilian's what she am. And she's knit to fit like a patchwork quilt, and from her sweat this country's been built. But keep it simple, stupid, just call her American. Now you can just call her American, you can just call her American, though sometimes she ain't quite sure just what that means. But from sea to shining sea, there are 300 million she's, a red, white, and blue, and every in between. Now, you can just call us Americans, you can just call us Americans, though sometimes we ain't quite sure just what that means. But from sea to shining sea, there are 300 million we's, a red, white, and blue, and every in between. A red, white, and blue, and every in between. A red, white, and blue, and every in between. Abigail Reisman on violin. Courtney Swain on piano, voice, and bass. Mr. Guy Mendilow on piano, voice, and guitar.
Regie Gibson on powerful words.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Brookline, for having us.
And thank you for a powerful and memorable performance. Didn't I tell you to listen actively? You'll not only be entertained, but you will be intellectually challenged and thoughtfully provoked. So thank you for attending the town of Brookline's 2024 Martin Luther King Jr. celebration event. Be safe on your way home in this, well, it's not that cold, but it's threatening to be cold weather. And of course, we're not as bad off as some parts of this country. Let's be thankful for that. But first, before you leave, I want to thank the people who made this program possible. This year's event was a collaboration of many, many dedicated organizations and individuals. The entire list is in your program. And I urge you to review the list to see who really plays a role in making a program like this possible and available to Brookline and the world, frankly. But we must highlight particularly our sponsors. Of course, the Coolidge Corner Theater, who has graciously hosted this event for over a decade. I've tried to find how many years over a decade, but no one knows, so it must go back many, many years. How lucky we are to have this type of institution in Brookline. And programs like this and many others that are held here at the Coolidge Corner Theater are reasons why we're so lucky, or illustrate why we're so lucky. I want to thank also the Brookline Community Foundation for essential financial support for this program and other programs of the committee and, of course, of the community. And, of course, the Brookline Interactive Group, public access cable channel for providing the filming of this event and for providing the video that you can look at on our website, on the town's on our web page, on the town's website. This program and many others that we have had over the years, both during Martin Luther King Day as well as through other times in the year, can be found on that web page. Okay, now clap. And finally, the Brookline Office of Diversity Equity since last year, Inclusion and Community Relations, and Dr. Lloyd Jeleno, the director of the department, and Caitlin Starr, the assistant director of the department. And a special shout out to Caitlin, who does an incredible, let me tell you, an incredible job helping us put this program together, as well as a zillion other things that she does, and I can't imagine how she's able to do it. But she does, and we thank her. And finally, a special shout out to Rob Daves, Margaret Talcott, Jack Curtis, who with Caitlin Starr and me are the hardworking, they're mostly the hardworking and creative parts, but hardworking and creative members of the MLK Celebration Committee. Thank you for the incredible work that we do, and under great pressure and other things that we won't talk about, but last minute type things. Any rate, finally, I want to mention a couple other events and activities. As I said, the MLK Committee occasionally presents special programs during the year on topics related to social justice. And those videos can be found on the committee's webpage on the town's website under Boards and Commissions. Some of them are very, very interesting, and I urge you to check them out. The webpage also includes upcoming events and activities that reflect King's values and that you can participate in and continue the educational process that we hope tonight's event has begun. The committee also supports efforts of other local organizations and individuals. I want to mention Brookline for the Culture, a local organization that focuses on social awareness and community action. Also, we have always had a partnership with the League of Women Voters, who work on public policy issues and voter engagement. On January 17th, the League will sponsor a discussion on the topic, Turning Words into Effective Action. This will be an online program on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for nonprofits and the communities they serve. As I'm sure you're all aware, we are seeing around the country that the very idea of equity is under vicious attack, including here in our Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our response must be powerful, but also thoughtful. This program can contribute to that effort. And by the way, I emphasize thoughtful because one of the things we're seeing is that the attack on equity uses what we say, turning it around against us. So thoughtful responses are more important than just reaction. The program of the League of Women Voters will be live streamed on BIG from 7 to 8:30 p.m. on January 17. That's it. Although one last thing, as you leave, we will be playing a Lift Every Voice and Sing, which has been called the Negro National Anthem. This song, which is a beautiful song and very, very important to the committee as well as to the nation, began as a poem in 1899 written by the great poet, educator, lawyer, leader of the NAACP, diplomat, and literary giant of the Harlem Renaissance, James Weldon Johnson. Next year, in 1900, the poem was put to music by his brother John Rosamond Johnson, which we hear so much, especially during events like today's event honoring Martin Luther King. I'd like to leave with a quote from King's Nobel Prize address that you may remember, that I think is relevant and worth thinking about in today's difficult world. He said, "Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral question of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression." I love that quote. And I think it says so much, and it's so relevant in so many ways to today. So please keep that on your mind. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight.